you for coming near or far. I know some of you have traveled quite some ways, and I was just talking to Miss Gabaldon and told her that she has some really wonderful fans. So Miss Gabaldon has, agreed to come all the way out here to Green Creek, our little town here. And I will not hold up any more of her time so that you guys can listen to her excerpt, and she will follow up with a question and answer session. And then I will be back up here, so stay seated after the presentation, and I will give you some more instructions about what we're going to do with autographing. Okay. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Diana Gabaldon.
Well, thanks very much. It's lovely to be here and to see so many of you today. They were telling me that when they put tickets on sale, they sold out in 3 minutes and 49 seconds, which is so you guys are real quick on the trigger, but much appreciated. You know, the first time I had lunch with Katrina and Sam from the show, they were saying, oh, we were just staggered by the enthusiasm of the fans. We had just gone to our first fan event, which was 2,500 people in a big theater in LA. And they're saying, they're treating us like rock stars. And I said, well, don't look now, you know. But, but I said, you know, the fans are great. I said, the fans of Outlander tend to be, you know, educated, civil, you know, compassionate, you know, just genuinely nice people and, you know, intelligent. But which is not always the case, I'm afraid, with the fans of other shows, maybe we won't mention. But anyway, I said, yeah, I have never had a bad fan experience, not ever. I said some of them are a little intense once in a while, but like the nice lady from Canada who attended one of my signings there, the people at the bookstore said this one woman, she came 4 hours early because she said she really, really had to be the first one in line because she has something she wants to show you. I said, okay, great. So, you know, people do bring me, you know, very interesting, nice things, you know, beautiful things that they've made and so forth. And so I was expecting something of the sort. Instead, she came up, you know, very nervous and, you know, greeted me and shaking hands. She removed one of her shoes and her sock so that I could see that she had had the running stag brooch from the cover of Fiery Cross tattooed on her foot. I said, okay, oh, that looks painful. But she presented me with a small silver bangle, which I could, you know, thank her for at least, and also a Polaroid photo of her foot to commemorate the occasion. Yeah, well, I mean, we appreciate the sentiment, you know, but you know, don't feel obliged to go that far. Yeah. Anyway, I told them about that, and I said, but on the whole, I said, we just don't attract nuts, you know. I said, on the other hand, I attribute this to the fact that people with real mental derangements don't have the attention span to read one of my books. Yeah, this is true. Yeah. And I said, we've got a natural filter, and those are the fans you've just met. I said, on the other hand, anyone can watch television. You know, you got no protection on that side. I said, so I can't tell what kind of people you might get, and they do get a few weird ones, you know. But basically, still the people who love Outlander, book, show, whatever, tend to be just really, really nice people. And what's most astonishing and gratifying about it is the way that you all form communities. You know, you form little friendship groups and you know, and bigger enterprise groups and Facebook groups and book club groups and so forth. But I tend to have a lot of people at signings and have had for the last 20 odd years. And so, you know, people waiting for hours to get their book signed, which is really nice of them. But, you know, I never have cranky people in line because they all start talking to each other. By the time they get to me, you know, they know each other's grandchildren's names and their husband's shoe size, and they're, you know, busy exchanging selfies and getting email addresses and so forth, which, you know, is actually probably the reason why you all got a show finally, is because the various television companies were looking for something to compete with Game of Thrones. And they said, well, Game of Thrones succeeded because the books had a huge fan base that we could approach. Where will we find something else like that? Okay, well, that is basically me. There's not a whole lot of competition. And that's how we got launched as a show to begin with. But, the fans continue to be a huge importance to the show. I've never seen a production or a production company go more out of its way to engage with the fans. And this may be because I told them to begin with, I said, look, I've talked to the fans for the last 30 years. They feel free to come and talk to each other, and they can talk to me if I'm online at the same time they are, and so forth. But there's just a lot of back and forth. I've always shared what I'm writing, while I'm writing it, partly because it's a really long time between books and I need the feedback to keep me going. I have a very high gratification threshold. And I said, but it's this sense of ongoing involvement that is one of the reasons we have a good fan group. Anyway, they listened to that and they said, good, we want to keep that going. And so they've been very good about organizing fan events and, doing very good websites and things like that to sort of spread the news, so to speak, and provide a channel for people to be like this. On the other hand, it's also of great benefit to me because y'all are a wonderful pressure block. I am a consultant on the show, which means that I read the scripts, I read the outlines for the scripts, I read the revisions of the scripts. Every single script goes through at least 7 revisions before it actually goes to production. And when they start shooting it, it's going to change some more because stuff changes on the ground while you're shooting all the time. And I'll tell you more about one of those a bit later. But that being so, just a brief blackout spell, right? I've forgotten. I'm sure you know what that's like. Yeah, anyway. What was I saying? Oh, about script changes and the importance of fans and so forth. See, it all comes back. You just wait a minute. Anyway, if I could read a script and they've done something just awful, I can write. I try to be tactful about this. It is an adaptation. I understand what they're doing. I do not and never have expected things to be filmed exactly like they are in the book. And some things I can look at and think they're never going to be able to do that. I wonder how they're going to get around it and things like that. But occasionally, they will just have the writer or someone will have a really oddball take. It's usually on what a character would or wouldn't do, how this or that might work. And I look at that and I going, no, I just know it's not going to work. Well, I have no veto power as such. They do pay attention to what I say. They take my opinions into consideration, but I can't make them do anything or make them not do anything. On the other hand, my words have a lot more weight because they know there's 2 million of you guys behind me. And, they kind of don't want me to get up in public and say, well, they insisted on doing this horrible thing. I couldn't stop them. I think this is awful, And yeah, so, in fact, I don't do that, even when I do think that. And they do things that I don't like particularly for one reason or another. But in most cases, I can see why they did it. And, they're artists as well. This is their show. And they have a right to kind of put their personal stamp on it if they want to. And, they're artists, so they do want to. But, by and large, we work together very well. It's a very congenial relationship and has been from the beginning. When we started doing this, Ron Moore and his production partner, Merrill Davis, came out to my house and stayed for a couple of days talking over their ideas about the show and what did I think of this and did I have any unpublished stuff that they should know about and things like that. And we got along really well. Ron's idea of storytelling was very much my idea of storytelling. That is, it all depends on the characters. And he was able to tell me some things about television. And I've learned a whole lot about television that I didn't know when we started this. But he said, for instance, you have to grab the audience immediately. If you go 30 seconds without something happening, they'll change the channel. So he said, right up front, we need to do something. He said, the book starts, very slowly. And he said, you can do that in a book, because the quality of the writing and the intrigue of the surroundings will kind of pull people in. They'll wait to see what you're about to do. You can't do that in television. You got to do something right there. So he said, here, Claire is kind of the essence of the first season and so forth, because, she is the Outlander. She's the person who's going to travel. So we need to understand who she is pretty much immediately and be interested in her. And he said, so I would like to do like a little 2-minute prologue at the beginning, a little visual prologue that shows Claire doing what she does. That's set in World War II, and she's in the middle of a post-battle scene. She's cleaning people up, stopping them from bleeding to death, being a nurse, being who she is, this very fierce, focused, competent person, and obviously in a dramatic setting. And I'm going, yeah, sounds great. Let's do that. So we did, and everything worked out pretty well. Then there's other things. We got toward the end of that last season, and naming no names, but the person who wrote one of the last two episodes had started the conversation with Jamie and Black Jack Randall in the dungeon at Wentworth, in which Jack Randall professes his undying love for Jamie and tries to persuade him to run away with him, elope to the continent where they will live as lovers. And I'm sort of going, no. Not only would Jamie not ever do that, but Black Jack Randall would never do that. I mean, it's not his style. Anyway, I could not budge the writer and so forth, and so I finally had to resort to veiled mob threats and things like that. But they did change it. Like I say, they do listen to me. But it's back and forth. It's always some tension between how much time do we have, because they shoot a lot more film than you ever see, and a lot of what they shoot is really great, good stuff. And yet when they splice it together, when they do the edits and so forth, they're thinking, oh my God, we've only got 57 minutes. I have this scene and it runs 4 minutes. I don't really have 4 minutes, and I need 2 of those minutes for this. So I need to ditch this and find another 2-minute scene that we can use there. This is why you get some of the things that you see, is because they're having to shoehorn what is a huge story down into an organized, usable script, which they do. But even the film that's shot from that script then also has to be condensed further in order to fit the space. So I think they do a really good job by and large. Yeah, they do. Thank you. Yeah. I don't mean to go on and on about the show. We'll talk about books here in a second. It was just fresh in my mind because I spent yesterday in Los Angeles doing filmed interviews for the Sony DVD Season 4 set, which will be out shortly. And this is why I look reasonably well made up this morning, is because they made me up yesterday and it hasn't gone away yet. This is the thing about professional makeup artists. If they make you up, you stay made up. Because they don't want your makeup coming off in the middle of a long day of interviews or shooting or anything. In fact, usually they travel around with you with this brush and powder at the ready. And anytime there's the faintest break, they rush out and powder you like mad. And when you're on set as well, I speak from my 2 days experiences as a cameo extra in season 1. But it was fascinating just to watch how it all works, because each actor of the main group, and then there's some other people who attend what they call the dress extras, but the main actors all have their own individual makeup person, as did I for this particular occasion. And it is that person's job to lurk in the wings, and the minute the assistant director shouts cut, they rush out and inspect you and powder you and tuck back anything that comes loose. Wigs, for instance, yeah. I know wigs are a sore spot, but anyway, the way wigs work is that the hair is implanted in sort of a little lace cap that actually comes down over your forehead and temples. And that's what holds it on your head. And then they use a sort of glue that makes the cap become invisible and holds it to your skin. Okay, which is, it obviously works fine because you've never seen that on the film, but it feels really funny, I'll tell you. And the thing is that the glue occasionally will give way if you're doing something violent or standing under hot lights for a long time. And so the makeup people all have a little bottle of the solvent and will run out and re-glue you quickly if it looks like you're coming loose anywhere. And then there's a separate costume person who rushes out and rearranges you and tucks your bodice back in, things like that. I mean, you're basically just sort of standing here and people are doing things to you. But, this is happening to all the actors. They just go on with their conversations and so forth. I was we were out shooting outside in a place called Muravenside. It was where there was the long horse chase in episode 211. And, Jamie and Claire were part of the time they were Sam and Katrina, and part of the time they were stunt writers. But the footage had to match. And so I was standing there talking to someone, and over to the side was Sam talking to someone else. He was standing with 1 foot on a box with his kilt hiked up around his waist, so that the makeup person who was kneeling at his feet she had a paintbrush dipped in fake mud and was going. So his legs would look authentically splashed. Like I say, it's a real education to be on a film set. This was the same shoot on a different day when I met Graham McTavish coming down the hill from shooting, and this was when we'd been doing the scene where Rupert is shot and almost falls off the horse, and Dougal, runs up quickly and leaps onto the horse behind him and saves him, and so forth. Very dramatic. Okay, well, the Dougal who leaps on and saves Rupert is a stunt writer. He's actually the master of horse for the production, Dom Priest, and obviously very good on a horse. But Graham had to be in the close-ups for doing this. So they had a mechanical horse on the back of the camera truck. And as the assistant director said to me, it looks like shit, but it doesn't matter because nobody's ever going to see it. And, so they shot scene after scene after scene with a really slowly moving camera truck with Graham, bringing his horse up alongside and then stopping and leaping off onto the mechanical horse. And they did this multiple times. The conclusion of which Graham came staggering down the hill toward me and Kenny were standing there, and he said, "I have just been having a conversation with my balls." And they both said, "We'd really rather you didn't do that again." Yeah, deeply entertaining. Anyway, as I say, this is all kind of fresh in my mind because while I was doing the interview for Sony and so forth, Sam Hewen was also in LA yesterday, and so they grabbed him to come in and do his interview right after mine. So we had a chance to visit for a little bit and catch up on this, that, and the other, and when the new season starts filming and so forth, which I know, but I'm not allowed to tell you, and things like that, and so forth. But anyway, he sends his regards. I told him I would be here today, and yeah. Well, he is a nice guy. Yeah. No, and when I walked into the room where he was, I said, "You look great," as he always does. And I said, "Hey, you look great too," which he always does. He would if he'd been dead for a week. Which, it was apparently the case because he said, "No, I look hungover and drinking whiskey all morning." So they had a haggis ceremony. Yesterday was Burns Day, Robert Burns Day, and of course important to Scots. And so the BAFTA organization had got him to come and to do the address to the haggis because he's got this wonderful deep voice and all that. But he said everyone was handing me their whiskey, and I said, "Then you drank it all?" And he said, "Alas, yes." But anyway, yeah, I will let you all ask questions later on so we can go on with that. But speaking of questions, I should probably switch back to books, and this is a library, and answer probably the most pressing question, which is, when is the next book coming out? The answer being, I don't know, but the no, honestly, I don't. But the probabilities are fairly strong that it will be later this year. Probabilities if I don't get hit by a bus or something like that. Yeah, because the writing is going really, really well. I have come to the point in the writing that I call the final frenzy, or I'm at the beginning of the final frenzy. That's where I know everything in this book, pretty much where it happens and how it happens. I don't know exactly how it happens because I haven't written large parts of it as yet, but I know where all the pieces are. Some of you who have heard me talk before know that I don't write with an outline and I don't write in a straight line. One of the gentlemen who brought me in mentioned that, so we have a number of writers' classes that attend the library here and so forth, and I said I would do a short recorded piece for them in between this and the signing. But meanwhile, we can talk about it. And everybody says, "Well, how did you get the idea to write Outlander?" And it occurred to me only this week that when people say that, they actually mean by idea, they mean a plot or, a major theme. I'm going to write a book about, this particular thing, or I have this wonderful story where this, and this happens. And to me and most other writers I know, an idea is just any random thing that lets you put words on the page. You get thousands of them, all of the time, and you just pick an enticing one and you start with that, which is what I do. I mean, a lot of writers do, in fact, write outlines and figure out what they're going to do before they do it. That makes them feel secure, and their minds actually work in a linear fashion. I wouldn't have any idea what that feels like, actually. You might have gathered that from my mode of address here, but no, I think I have a very benign form of ADD in that, I normally work on 2 or 3 different projects during an evening as I go along. Often the 3 screens that I have open are 3 different scenes from the same book. Sometimes it's a scene from the book that is theoretically at the top of the pile, plus something else that just bubbled up, and the third thing will be an essay, a nonfiction introduction or something like that. But I learned long ago when I wrote, at the time when I started writing Outlander, I had 2 full-time jobs and 3 children under the age of 6. Which is why I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, including my husband, because he would have tried to stop me, not out of any objection to my writing a book, but out of fear that I would drop dead. He would have just said, wait until the kids are at school, wait till my business is doing better and you can quit one of your jobs. And I just knew if I didn't write then, I might never do it, so I didn't tell him, and just started writing. So at that point, my job was, I was an assistant research professor at ASU. I was a research professor, meaning that I was doing research projects, which meant a lot of writing of scholarly articles and monographs and things like that. But I also taught part-time. People would borrow me to replace someone on sabbatical, and so then I'd be writing exams and tutorials and stuff like that. And I also had a full-time job writing freelance for the computer press. So I had sort of slid sideways by some accident, which I won't go into, and had become a, quote, expert in scientific computation. It's easy to be an expert if there's only 6 people in the world who do what you do. And that was my position at the time. But it came in handy. I had begun a journal at ASU called Science Software Quarterly, which was for scientists who use computers in their work. It was about data acquisition, laboratory automation, things like that. And so back when the need to make more money without engaging in prostitution in the home arose, I said to myself, what else could I do? And I said, well, you know how to write, and you know a heck of a lot about scientific computation. So I wrote query letters to Byte and InfoWorld and PC Magazine and all these outlets, and I included with it a copy of my Science Software Quarterly, myself as editor-in-chief. I also wrote half of it, and also a comic book that I had written for Walt Disney some years before, entitled Nutrition Adventures with Orange Bird. It was a very short query letter. It said, "Dear sirs, as you can," they were all men at that point. It's computers, you know. And I said, "Dear sirs, you won't find anyone who knows more about scientific and technical software than I do, and at the same time can appeal to a broad popular audience." So that got immediate results, and within 6 months I was making as much writing for the press as I was at the university, which just goes to show how badly they pay people in the biological sciences. But anyway, that was my status when I decided to start writing a book. And I did that because I've always known I was supposed to write a book. From about the age of 8, I realized, which is when I realized that people actually wrote books. They didn't just pop out of the library shelves like toilet paper in the grocery store. And I thought, yeah, that's what I'm supposed to do. I didn't know how. Nobody does, is one of the secrets here. You are not born as a writer, or you're not born knowing how to write a book. It's a skill like anything else. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. Like I tell people, ballerinas aren't born on their toes, you know. And natural talent totally helps. Luck helps even more, but work is what'll get you there. Anyway, the thing was, I came from a very conservative family background. Some of the older people here may still remember my dad, Tony Gabaldon. He was a state senator here for 20 odd years, some of them odder than others. And anyway, he was the sort of person who would say to me, "You know, you're such a poor judge of character, you're bound to marry some bum," he said. So be sure that you get a good education so you can support your children. Yeah, so, when our kids started going to college and were worrying about their majors, as they all do, we said to them, look, Daddy and I between us have 5 advanced degrees. We don't use any of them. Said, don't sweat it. So, I, at the moment, have like 2 PhDs and all of this expertise in scientific computation. And what do? I write novels, because that's what I thought I should do. Well, anyway, as I said, I didn't know how to start, and nobody does. But I just knew that I needed to do this, and so I was, just read biographies of writers and see how they did it, and I would look at a series of books and see how people evolved in their skills and all that. And when I turned 35, I said to myself, Mozart was dead at 36. Maybe you better get moving here, and just in case. And so I said, okay, on my next birthday, I'm going to start writing a book. Okay, I don't know what kind of book it should be, but I'm going to start writing a book because I've written all kinds of things to this point, all the technical stuff, comic books, popular science, technical journals, and no one has ever shown me how to write any of this stuff. I just looked at a few examples, wrote one, and if it didn't look quite right, I poked it till it did. I said, okay, I've been reading novels for 30-odd years. Surely if I write one, I will recognize it. Said, okay, so I'm going to write a book. I need to know what it takes mentally, in terms of daily discipline and, mental commitment and organization and research and, these kinds of things that you don't use when you're writing comic books or technical articles. And I said, okay, so the only way to learn that is to actually write a novel. Okay, what kind of novel shall I write? And I thought about that for a while because I read everything and lots of it, but I read maybe more mysteries than anything else, crime novels. And I was thinking, well, maybe I should write a crime novel. And I'm thinking, no, I don't know if I can write a plot or not. So let's pick something easier. And I thought, what's the easiest thing I could possibly write for practice? And I said, well, for me, probably historical fiction. I said, I am a research professor. I know my way around the library. It seems easier to look things up than to make things up. And if I turn out to have no imagination, I can steal things from the historical record, which actually works pretty well. And so I said, okay, historical novel. Where shall I set this? Because I have no background in history, just 6 hours of Western civilization that they make you take as an undergrad. And so any time would do as well as another. I'd have to look it all up anyway. So I'm thinking, what would be appealing? 15th century Venice, you got Borgias, that's always an evocative name. You got American Civil War, deeply tragic, deeply romantic, all kinds of stuff. And in this malleable frame of mind, I happened to see a really old Doctor Who rerun on public television. Yes, any of you who are PBS supporters, thank you for that. But anyway, this was a really old Doctor Who special. I'm assuming that most of you do know who Doctor Who is. Yeah, and it's for the vague person who might not. It is a really old, really long-running fantasy show done in the UK. Originally done as a kid's show, but it's gotten much more adult and sophisticated. It's been running literally for over 60 years, and they handle this by having the Doctor conveniently reincarnated every time they issue a new contract. And so I think we're on, the 14th Doctor at the moment, and this time she's a woman. Yeah, I haven't seen any of her shows yet, but I'm looking forward to them, yeah. Okay, so anyway, this was the second Doctor, which will show you how far back that one goes. And the essence of the Doctor's story is that he is a Time Lord from the planet Gallifrey, who travels through space and time having adventures. And along the way, he picks up companions from different periods of Earth's history. He is attracted to Earthlings because he thinks they're funny, and which they sure are. And anyway, in this very old show, the Doctor had picked up this young Scotsman from 1745. And this was a young man, 19, 20, who appeared in his kilt. And I said, well, that's kind of fetching. And I found myself still thinking about this the next day in church. And I said, yeah, my husband says, I don't know how you do this. You keep cracking up all the time you're talking to these people. Yeah, anyway, anyway, so I said, okay, yeah, you got to start somewhere. Why not find Scotland 18th century? And so that's where I began, knowing nothing about Scotland or the 18th century, having no plot, no outline, and no characters. Nothing but the rather vague images conjured up by the notion of a man in a kilt, which is, a very powerful and compelling image. especially if you've been watching Outlander. Anyway, another killed story, which I would not tell if there were any children in the audience, but luckily there aren't, at least none of listenable age. Yeah, much later, when I wrote Breath of Snow and Ashes, that was a very lucky book for me. It won several awards, including one that beat both George R.R. Martin and Stephen King, but it was a Quill Award. Oh, thank you. But the most showy of those awards was the Corina International Prize for Fiction, which was given by a German body. So I had to go to Germany to be photographed and interviewed on Bavarian television. And so I did. And the publisher took advantage of my presence to have me interviewed by everybody in the German press. Just one after another. Everybody from Vanity Fair or their equivalent, or Der Spiegel, on down to the local tabloids. Just anybody who wanted to interview me, they would come and bring them to my hotel, and we'd sit there all day with mineral water, and we didn't get any alcohol till we were done, but for good reasons. Yeah. Anyway, toward the end of this process, I was just like this and cross-eyed, and I don't know what I was telling most of these people. But I found probably the same thing. They all asked the same questions, but to a point. This last person was a gentleman from a literary magazine, and he said, I've read your entire work. He said, they're fabulous. Your characters, they're so three-dimensional. Your narrative is just magical, and your background is just transcendental. And I'm thinking, yes, go on. And instead, he paused and he said, there's just this one thing I wonder. Can you explain to me, what is the appeal of a man in a kilt? Well, he was a German and a man, and I said, I was very tired. I might not have said it. I said, well, I suppose it's the idea that you could be up against a wall with him in a minute. Yes, I particularly like to tell that story if there's a man in the front row wearing a kilt. Anyway, 3 weeks later, I was back home and, more or less recovered from this trip. And I got this huge bundle of press clippings from Germany. Well, I can read German, but very, very slowly, so I wasn't going through these. But I opened it up, and on the top was this particular interview. I recognized the man's name. And there was a post-it from the publisher that said, I don't know what you told this man, but I think he is in love with you. Let's see, so where was I? Oh yes, back with Outlander. But so anyway, that's where I began writing. I was in church, as I said at the time, so I dug a piece of scrap paper out from under the front seat of my car and just scribbled down a couple of words, like man killed and things like that, just as a aid memoir. That's probably the last note I've ever made on the book. Everything is in my head, because if I write things down, I forget them. So I usually just kind of crystallize things as a visual image, and then I can just stick it somewhere and then unpack it when I get back to my computer. But anyway, I then went immediately the next day to the university library and started looking up Scotland in the 18th century. Okay, well at this point, the only thing that I knew about writing novels was that they should have conflict. This is 26 hours, and as an English minor will get you. That's what I came away knowing. But anyway, I said, okay, so I'm looking for conflict. Well, if you look for conflict in Scotland in the 18th century, the first thing you run into is Bonnie Prince Charlie and the Jacobite Rising of 45. I said, well, that looks like a heck of a lot of conflict. Fine, we'll use that. And so I said, okay, on the basis of, my 1 or 2 days of sketchy research, during which I had begun writing. I began writing that night when I got to my office, because without going into a long digression. There's a reason why I write long books. It's because I like digressions. But in this particular instance, we will avoid it if we can. I had, over the years, encountered a large number of people in online groups and so forth who wanted to write historical fiction. And without exception, they all did research first. Without exception, none of them ever wrote a book, because either they fell in love with the research and decided that they really weren't interested in the novel. One of them actually went back to Northridge and got a PhD in history as a result of not writing a book. And other people, they would just say, oh, I'm really looking forward to starting this book, but I need to know so much more. And they'd been researching for 10 years. And I did know enough about history to realize that it is not a finite quantity. There's always more you can find out. You could go on researching until you die, and many people do. I said, well, my point is not to learn everything there is to know about Scotland in the 18th century. My goal is to write a book, or to learn how to write a book. So I said, I'm going to immediately begin writing the book and doing the research because, well, I want it to be accurate. I also want to find out how to write a book, which is a daily process, I believe, and it is. And I said, so I'm just going to write. And if I write something and I later discover in the research that this is wrong, I'll change it. It's words on the page. I have a word processor, what's the big deal? And so that's how I have always proceeded. I don't do research ahead of writing a book. I research what I need to know, and in the course of that, I find out a lot of other things which stimulate other scenes. And basically, the research and the writing kind of feed each other in kind of a positive feedback loop. I'll be writing something and I'll come to something, if I just come to something like a street name or a tree or something, I'll just put square brackets with tree inside it, and so when I go back during the copy edit, I can, get my guide to North Carolina trees and figure out which tree that should have been, but, there's no need to hold up the writing for stuff like that. But other things, you actually need to know how something was done in order to describe it in the writing. And so for that, I'll stop and, go look up one of my books. I have a lot of books that explain how things are done, especially medical things. And usually while I'm reading through that, I will find some other totally fascinating thing, like some obscure condition that Claire could run into and treat later on. Has nothing to do with the scene I'm writing here, but I will immediately start writing another scene that has that, and then come back to the one I was researching and go on. This is, why I say I have ADD, it's because I do. But luckily, I have found a way to exploit that, so to speak. Yeah, I actually have held down full-time jobs in the past, but they were all ones that allowed me quite a lot of personal latitude in how I did them. So as long as you can bend your circumstances to work with your brain, you're fine. But that's basically the first lesson in writing, is to figure out how your own brain works, because as I said, a lot of people really are linear, and that's the way they teach you to do it in school. They say, well, you must read your background sources, you must have a topic sentence, you must have a topic paragraph, you must have a numbered outline which lays out the main points of your essay, your argument, your paper, whatever, and then you must write a rough draft, you must have it corrected, you must revise and take into account all the corrections, you must write a second draft, you send it back, and the teacher, your parents, or someone will read it, and if they have no more corrections, then you can write a final draft which you can turn in along with your outline. When I go and talk to elementary schools, I always get to about this point in the process, and then I ask the teacher to turn his or her back, and I say, okay, teacher can't see you now. Tell me the truth. When you get one of these assignments, you write the outline and so forth and so on, how many of you just write the paper and then fake up the rest to turn in? About half of them will raise their hands. These are the people who think like I do. We don't see any point at all in going through this kind of rigmarole. I can see, the shape kind of what I want to say. Let's just, mess around with that, And when I have that, then it's pi to write the outline if you already wrote the paper. So, yeah. But the thing is, you can't teach people to do it that way. You can force people who think like I do to at least produce linear-looking work that looks like they thought through it linearly. And that's why people have always been educated with the idea that this is the way to write a book. And, if I can't even write a good outline, obviously I will never write a novel. Okay, this is not true. I think schools actually should admit that not everybody's brain works that way, because there are a whole lot of us who don't work that way. But, thank you. But the thing is, as I say, you can't teach a person who thinks linearly to hop around like the rest of I can't say the majority of us do, because it's probably a little less than half, but like the people who don't. You can force the people who don't to look like they're being linear, and so that's why they do that in school, because it suits the linear people and the other people are just, playing along. But you can't take a linear person and say, well, I want you to write, 4 widely scattered scenes that all have something to do with the book and will eventually turn up in the right shape, because for one thing, they don't believe it can be done. They totally don't believe anybody can do what it is that I do. When I start explaining it, they're like, no, that's not how you do it. I'm going, yeah, really honest. I once was on a panel at a fantasy convention with a very best-selling author next to me, and they were interviewing us about how do you write, essentially, how do you structure a story and whatnot. And she went on and on and on about her thorough, exhaustive research, and how she made a very detailed outline and had wall charts with her characters, taste in shoes and what fetishes they had and things like that. And I'm sitting there, they got to me, and I said, well, all I need to start is what I call a kernel, very vivid image, a line of dialogue, dialogue, anything that I can see concretely, and then I can write a sentence about it. And I write the sentence and I sit there and stare at it, and I'm taking words out and putting them back and trying to reshape that sentence so it is as clear and elegant as it can be and as accurate in describing what I'm saying. And I said at the same time, the back of my brain is asking questions. It's saying, what time of day is it? How is the light falling? Is there anything else in the room with me? And is the room cold? Yes, it is. My fingers are cold, and so is the end of my nose, but my feet are warm. Why is that? There must be a fire in here. Where is it? Oh, it's over there. There's a dog by the fire. I've never seen him before. You can't teach people to do that. Anyway, I said this, on this panel, which the lady to my left looked at me and she said, "You can't do that." I said, "I just did." And she persisted. I mean, they really don't believe it. She said, "But you can't do that." She said, "You have to have a foundation, and then you build it up, and then you put the roof on. You can't have the roof first." I said, "Why not? There's no gravity in my mind." There really isn't a lot of gravity in my mind, I'm afraid. It's all on the light side. But anyway, I want to make sure that you get time to ask a few questions. So this would probably be a good time for me to pause for breath and ask you if you do have any questions, taking up any of the threads that I've introduced here. Yeah, sure.
I want to know if you have a keen sense of smell and what your first childhood memory is.
She wants to know if I have a keen sense of smell and what my first childhood memory is. Yes, I do have a very keen sense of smell.
I'm listening to an audiobook, and you talk about smells and scents a lot.
Yeah, I do. And that is not only because they're part of the sensory impression that I get when I walk into a new place. I don't always notice it consciously, but it's totally there. And if I think about a place, I'm back and I can smell that in memory. So that's one reason for putting it in. The other is that this is how you make a scene immersive. It's called the rule of three. Gustave Flaubert was the first person I know who explicated it, but people have been using it forever. Anyway, what he said was there's 5 senses that we know about, and he said most people only use the first, sight and sound. You have a scene in which people are looking at each other, describing what they look like, and they're talking to each other, so you got sight and sound. He said if you add a third sense, any of the others, touch, smell, I can't remember what the other one is, but oh yeah, that one. Okay. Anyway, if you add one of those and have 3 senses working, the scene immediately becomes more 3-dimensional, and people feel immersed in it. And so I actually already was doing that without realizing it, and then I went back and checked to be sure I actually was doing it throughout. And yeah. Anyway, if you do that, if somebody tells you the story seems to be working, but it's kind of flat, try doing that. Add in an extra sense. Do it gracefully and so forth. I always use it as like a dependent clause to something else, but. Yeah, I have a lot of people saying, we can't understand exactly why Clara's in love with Jamie. He seems to smell bad a lot of the time. And saying, well, obviously you belong to the 60% of the population that cannot smell aldosterol, which is the male hormone that is responsible for what you might call the locker room smell, but it's also a really tangy male scent. I, as you might suppose, I'm in the 40% that can smell that. So what smells to me good on a man is maybe not what would appeal to other people. But anyway, I'm not going to start sniffing you, don't worry. Yeah, it's to first memory. I honestly don't have a whole lot of very young memories, or what I have are overlaid by older ones because I tended to live in the same house for a long time. I lived in a couple of different houses when I was very young, and the oldest memory that I can locate with any certainty would be when I was about 18 months old. It has to have been that much because we moved to the next house at about that time. But I was standing on the seat of a kitchen chair, holding on to the back of it, and I was chewing on the red plastic covering of the chair. I remember that. It was that sort of pearlized covering. Yeah, so that's it, yeah. Yes, anyone else? Yes, in the middle there.
How many more books will there be in the series, or have you gotten to that point yet even?
How many more books?
You just said something about you were finalizing and
Oh, well.
might be coming to an end.
Well, not exactly. I mean, eventually I'm going to come to an end, so we got to think about these things. I turned 67 a week ago. Well, thank you. Yes, and despite my father's dire warnings, I have in fact been successfully married to the same man for 47 years. Yeah. Our anniversary is on the 12th, Darwin's birthday. That we remember, yeah. Anyway, what was I saying here? Yes, about finalizing things. That had to do with the progress. This is actually where I started, far back there, so thank you for bringing us back. As I start writing a book, I don't know anything about it. And so I'm writing very slowly. I do try to write every day, because if you stop, the inertia builds up and it's really hard to start again. So I try to keep it rolling day by day, even if some days I can tell what I'm writing is, this isn't going anywhere. But I will still do my best with it, because you keep your synapses oiled. And as we write like that, I may be writing half a page a day and doing a lot of research and reading and thinking and so forth, but I do keep writing. Well, as I ease my way into the book and I begin to see where we are, what's happening, who's talking and so forth, the scenes get longer and more involved. I begin to have some idea that it's beyond where I'm writing. I can see something over here, and things build up gradually. This is a very long process. It used to take me 2 to 3 years to write a book. It now takes about 4 plus, both because the books have gotten longer and more complex. All of the books are engineered to stand on their own, because I can't be sure that someone who finds book 9 in an airport will have read the first 8 books, so they have to be able to enjoy that book on its own terms. So there's a lot of engineering and picking up enough of the backstory that people can understand and go along with this, and people who haven't read the whole series in preparation will be reminded of things that they need to know, all without getting in the way of the story that you're actually telling. And as we go on, this is an exceedingly complex thing to do, and it takes a lot of time. Also, there's things like this, Yeah, you will notice that I'm not actually at home writing right now. Well, so it's all your fault if the next book is late. No, really, I try very hard, especially as I get into the hot and heavy part of a book, which is where I am now, not to go anywhere. But things happen. As I say, out of the blue, I had to go to LA yesterday to do the DVD interview, which something I was glad to do. It was fun. Nice to see Sam again, all that. But I wasn't writing anything yesterday either, other than a little bit in the airport while my flight was delayed. But that stuff gets in your way, and there's more and more and more of it the more popular you get, because there's a lot more PR to do with the show as well as the books, and that's an ongoing thing. If the books only come out every 4 years, then it's only every 4 years that I do the massive book tours in multiple countries. And a good thing too, because I wouldn't survive it if it was every year. But those things do take up a lot of your time. It takes up a lot of your time just to say no to people. We get 3 or 4 dozen invitations every month, to go here, go there, do this, do that. And, most of them were things that, if I were beginning my career and had, all the time in the world and more flexibility, I'd love to go to lunch with, 2 fans who are stopping in Scottsdale next week and want to take me to lunch. As it is, I have to say, no, I'm afraid not. For one thing, chances are really high that I won't actually be in Scottsdale next week. I may be, somewhere else doing something else, and I can't predict it at the moment, but even if I were here, I should be home writing. And, while I would love to meet you, I don't at this particular moment know you from a hole in the ground. And so, so, I reluctantly declined, but, thanks very much. Hope I see you at a book signing soon, that sort of thing. But, and I was telling Dan back there that I do try to do at least 1 or 2 of the smaller libraries in Arizona each year as kind of my baseline for events. I'll do, 2 or 3 large events that are somewhere else, because that's money that I donate to Nuestros Pequeños Hermanos, which is a line of orphanages in Latin America. So that's what I do with the PR money, so to speak. But we can't I can't spend my entire life as a fundraiser either, so it's kind of a balance, as to how much of the outside stuff I can do. Likewise, there's social media and things like that, but that's not really a problem. I have been online and dealing with fans since 1985. That's when I began, when I stumbled into CompuServe as a result of doing a review for Bite magazine and discovered the Literary Forum, which is a bunch of people who were interested in books. It was like a 24-hour literary cocktail party. So I immediately began hanging around there. And so the internet, as it were, has just kind of grown up around me. And whenever new social media comes along, I have a quick look at it. I'm thinking Snapchat, no. Instagram, no. This is not useful to my purposes. Facebook, yes. I put up posts. I don't have friends on Facebook. I never read the private messages. I put up posts and I will skim through the comments for the first 2 or 3 days and answer anything that seems pressing or needs explaining or whatever. But that's it. It doesn't take me more than half an hour max, and that's only if I'm putting up a new post. Twitter, when Sam Hewen was first cast, he was the first person cast, so he kind of took the brunt of all the adjustment. But about a week afterward, when people heard about it and started bombarding him, he was on Twitter when he got cast, and he had like 12 followers. I know because when they told me who he was, I went to look and see if he was available anywhere online. He had a Twitter account. And so I went and read it, and he was talking to his 2 or 3 friends there about going to Norway in a couple of days to shoot a movie up there. And so I just sort of inserted a quick comment and said, "Nice job, man," and had followed him at the same time, figuring that could be taken as otherwise if I didn't know if he knew who I was. Anyway, he did and saw that, and immediately 30 seconds later he's in my direct messages, which are the private ones. He's going, "This is so great. This is wonderful. I'm going, this is terrific. I loved your audition. I love the books. This is fantastic." So anyway, we've been friends since that point. But yeah, you had a question.
Did you have any input in who they selected for
No.
this year?
No, I have absolutely nothing to say about the casting, and why would I know nothing about how to cast actors? Yeah, nor do I know any actors, so to speak. And I didn't quite answer your question, which is that I am reasonably sure there's a 10th book in the main series, and there's also a prequel about Jamie Fraser's parents. Yeah. So we'll see how old I am when I finish those. Yes, over here.
Are you going to explain Jamie's ghost?
Am I going to explain Jamie's ghost? Yes, I will, but it's the last thing in the last book. Yeah, no, there's a good reason. Yeah. Yes, the gentleman there.
Fairly close to Fort Ticonderoga. Do you get to visit these places before you write about them, or you pretty much do your research and then you can write about it without actually going there?
Do I need to visit the places that I write about? It's good if you can. You can't always. Sometimes time or place or expenses don't allow. In my early days, of course, I was, having 2 jobs and 3 children and no money. There's no way I was going to tell my husband I have to go to Scotland and do research. So, in fact, Outlander was done entirely from library research, which just goes to show you how much you can find out about a place if you know where to look. This was pre-internet too. I did that entirely in libraries and interlibrary loan. But things get easier as you get older, more established in this, as when people begin admitting that this is actually your job and that you actually have a right to want to go and look at places that you're writing about. So let's see, the most recent place was Savannah, which was actually just recently last year, August I think. I went to the Savannah Book Festival primarily because part of the new book is set in Savannah during the siege thereof. And I said I need to go and see where the battleground is, if it's been conserved and so forth. Luckily it has been, and the local history museum there was actually doing a demonstration of the battle when we arrived. So we walked around with them, and they had a group of tourists that they'd rounded up and were instructing them like a drill sergeant, ram, load, fire, etc. Fall back, you come up, do it again. And over here is where count so and so tried 3 times to storm this particular little hill, which is like 6 feet tall. And they said on the 3rd try they shot him in the head, and they'd been shooting him in other places prior to that. And one of the little Haitian volunteers, sprang out of the crowd, grabbed the standard, and took it over the top, which is, tremendously moving and gallant and so forth. Anyway, so this stuff I learned on the ground in a book. Later, reading about the siege and so forth, I heard more about the little Haitian kid who was 12 at the time and later turned out to be the first king of Haiti. Executive stuff. Mm-hmm. Mm.
So you didn't have any input on who they cast?
No.
Are they who you saw in your head?
No, how could they be? No. Yeah, the question was, are the people who were cast who I saw in my head? And no, I mean, Claire and Jamie still look like Claire and Jamie to me, and no, they don't look anything like Sam and Katrina. Well, I mean, Sam has kind of the physical outline, but not the face, and Katrina is tall and willowy and an ex-runway model, and no, she doesn't look like Claire, but I didn't expect her to either. Yes, way in the back there. Oop, yeah, you.
I was just going to ask you, so how did you come up with the idea of Claire being British? Because you were talking about how you came up with Jamie.
Mm-hmm.
How did you come up with the idea that your female character was going to be British?
Oh, how did I come up with the idea that Claire should be British? I don't know, she just was. Yeah, I should maybe explain where she came from, so to speak. Like I told you, conflict was all I knew about writing a novel, but I didn't know I should start writing. Well, all I had in my head was a man in a kilt, so I started writing about the man in a kilt. And since I knew nothing, I was just little random half scenes. And the first one, I think, first thing I ever wrote was the man in a kilt having an argument with his sister who is cutting vegetables. And, I was just sort of experimenting with putting things down. And I called him Jamie out of compliment to the Doctor Who character, whose name in the show was Jamie McCrimmon. But I said, I don't know what his last name should be. I don't know anything about clan history, so I'm not sure where he should go. So he was just Jamie Blank for most of the book. And anyway, doing these sort of, not pointless scenes, but they didn't have a plot, so to speak. And I was doing more research. Well, about the third day, I said, well, we're going to do the Jacobite Rising, fine. We must have a lot of Scotsmen, of course, because of the kilt factor, but I think it would be good if we had a female character to play off these guys, and we'll have sexual tension, that's good. And I said, so given that at this point it looks like Scots versus English, if I make her an English woman, we will have lots of conflict. Okay, that's where she came from. That's why she's English. I had forgotten that train of thought, thank you. Yeah, I want to be sure to get people off this side as well. Is there anyone over here who has a question? Yeah, you.
How did you choose North Carolina? As a North Carolinian, raised up Arizona, you just made a whole state very, very proud of itself.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, you've had a great history. The question was, how did I choose North Carolina? Well, that too was sort of given to me. Reading through what happened during the Jacobite Rising and what happened after the Jacobite Rising, where did the survivors of Culloden go? Well, those who who weren't transported somewhere else, a lot of them came to America to escape or for other reasons to start a new life. And being Scots, they had very strong kinship ties. Well, in 1730, there had been a mass exodus of Scots to North Carolina. They settled along the Cape Fear River. Many of them were very prosperous at this point. That's where Anjocasta came from. And so the second wave who came after Culloden, they went to stay with their kinfolk, and then they made their way up the river to find new land and make their own lives. So I just followed history. Half of them went up the Cape Fear River. The others went up the coast and settled around Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia. That's why it's called Nova Scotia, New Scotland. Yeah. Yeah, over here, yeah.
Now that you're in the final frenzy of bees,
We're close, yeah, I'm putting it off because I have 2 more engagements that I have to do. When that closes in, Final Frenzy is, when I'm just writing flat out 12 or 14 hours a day and hardly sleeping or eating. But, it gets the book done.
well, is there a character that has surprised you? Somebody that's taken a bigger role than maybe you would have thought would have?
Am I surprised by a character who's sort of, come to the fore and so forth? Well, not really surprised because I was kind of expecting that she would, but she's interesting. She doesn't, she's kind of very shy about revealing herself, and so that's the way she's coming through here. But she has a lot of depth. That's Fanny, the young girl that William left with Jamie and Claire at the end of the last book. Yeah, so Fanny has a few things to do with a few things. Yeah. Let's see, back on the aisle there. Yeah.
I read somewhere that one of Jamie's quotes was a direct quote from your husband. I think the one when he says,
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
"If the last words I say to you are not, I love you." Does your husband just turn around from the toaster and say?
Well, there's a reason why I've been married to him for 47 years. Yeah, on that particular instance, he was actually reading the Wall Street Journal, and he just looked up from it and said that. He says things when they come to him. He doesn't, save them up. It's good. Is there anyone in the far back who had a question? You, right in the middle. Yeah?
I'm wondering, who are some of your most favorite authors?
Ooh, who are some of my favorite authors? Well, it's a long, long list because I'm 67 and I've been reading since I was 3, so they build up. The easiest way to answer that is probably to say that on my website, if you go there and you click on the tab that says resources, there is something under that called the methadone list. And that is for people who ask me, what am I going to read while I'm waiting for your next book? And what it is a list of authors that I can personally vouch for as being really, really good from a variety of genres, from literary fictions down to romance. I shouldn't say down to because they're good, but romance novels, fantasy, crime, etc. And some books that are just so odd they don't fit anywhere, like mine. So, so anyway, that would be a good rundown of some of my favorite authors. Yeah, Liddy here.
Could you speak a little bit about writing the script in season 1, and would you do that again?
Oh, it was actually season 2. She wanted to know if I could speak a little bit about writing a script and how that came about. Well, basically, they asked me if I would like to write a script, and I'm always up for a challenge. I've written pretty much everything else. Why not a script? So I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. It was fascinating. Yeah, really, really interesting. Part of what was interesting about it, not in a good way, is how collaborative script writing is. When I write a book, I'm God. Every word in there is what I wanted it to be. Script writing doesn't work that way. To begin with, they break the script. That is, they decide which incidents from the source material from the books they're going to be able to use and in what order. And they do move things around. You will have noticed that. And so they will have these particular incidents segregated into this episode and these in this one and so forth. And so they'll consider 2 or 3 episodes at a time when you're in the writer's room discussing your script, so that you can see how the previous script feeds into yours and what you have to produce to feed into the next one. But you have these particular elements to work with, and the whole room will sort of talk it through and decide on kind of a rough flow of events. And these are called the room notes. There's someone in the back typing all this stuff down, and so they'll email it to you later and you have the room notes to go on. But that's essentially laying out what they expect to happen, and then you write an outline from that. You send it back to them, and they make comments, and then you write a first script and so forth, and then you send it back to them, and you get notes from the showrunners and also from the Sony people and from the Starz people. All these people have input into a script and what happens. So I got back my first script from Ron, and he said, well, the notes here are fairly light. He says, there's only the first one you might take account of. And he said, I've combined the notes from Sony and Starz, and they both said this, essentially. Anyway, the first one said, this is a great script, we love it. Our only concern is that it sounds too much like Diana. They said it's extremely funny, and most of our other episodes aren't, so we're afraid that it might be too tonally different, and it would seem jarring rather than fitting into the smooth flow of the season. So basically they said, can you throttle it back a little? So I was obliged to be less funny. Anyway, then all kinds of people go on contributing, the actors, the directors, and so forth, and even the technical people. I will wrap it up in about 5 minutes here, but I should tell you this story just for illustration. The other writer on the block where I did my script was Ann Kenny, who's a good friend, lovely writer. And we were doing episode 208 was hers. That was the one in which they had to try to rehabilitate Leary, thankless job. And and then mine, which is 211. And they assign things to a block together so that they can use common resources. So they were having, some of the outside scenes were applicable to both of those scripts. Some of the inside scenes and sets likewise. And so they, most of the things we were doing were shot outside, and it was really horrible weather because it was November. But anyway, the fact that it's November is the salient point here. We came back from a long day's shooting at a place called Dean Castle. We had been looking it over, and we hadn't even shot there yet, but we had scouted it as a location. They were going to use that as a location. We just had to look at it to see how. And we got back, and the executive director, who had been riding behind me and Annie in the bus all day, he said, I need to talk to you guys, come into my office. And so we did, and the director of photography came in too. And David said, well, the problem here is I've been on the phone with Nell Hudson and Annette Badlands agents all day. And those are the actresses who play Leary, Mackenzie, and Mrs. Fitzgibbons. And he said, the problem is we have Dean Castle to shoot in for 4 days. He said, we can only have these 4 days. It's booked for other stuff on either side. He said, so we can't move the days. He said, Annette can come on day 1 and day 2, but not day 3 and day 4. Nell can come on day 3 and day 4, but not day 1 and day 2. There's no way I can have them together. So he turned to Anne, and I was glad it was Anne, and he was saying, so you got 5 scenes where you have both of them together. You're gonna have to rewrite those, you know, so you only have one of them, but you get to pick which one. So I can see Anne turning white, you know, clenching her fingers, because it meant she was gonna have to stay up all night to rewrite the script, because they were, you know, going into production the next day. And so I'm thinking, geez, well, the next thing, the director of photography pipes up and he says, well, that's not the only problem. He said, again to Anne, thank God, he said, you've got all these scenes that take place in the courtyard of Dean Castle. And he said, I think you've got 7 of them. He said, it's winter, it's Scotland. The sun goes away at 3:30 in the afternoon. He said those have to be shot by daylight. We can't replicate the light conditions with large lights or anything. He said we also can't start shooting any earlier because the sun doesn't come up until 8:30. He said, so I have, you know, just those hours, that 7 hours to shoot in. He said, of the 7 scenes you've got, I could do 4. Which 4 do you want? And so I'm going, ah. But you know, that may account if you had any reservations about that particular episode. It can just bear things like that in mind. It might have been different if we had been able to include Annette Badlands. Anne's idea was that Mrs. Fitz, you know, could have, you know, talked to Claire privately and, you know, made a case for Leary and, you know, persuaded her to forgive Leary and so forth, which might have worked better. You just never know. As it is, you know. Well, they made a mistake anyway by making Leary this huge villain in season 1 just because they wanted more drama. Oh, it'd be so much more conflict, you know, if she actually plotted it and she was there for the arrest and I need to dance on Claire's grave. And I was going, you're going to regret that. Said, you do know Jamie's going to marry her in the 3rd book. But you know, they're TV people. They say, oh, yeah, we'll figure that out when we get there. And that's what you get. Okay, over here.
Yeah, you've been so successful and prolific. What keeps you going, and is it easier?
Oh, what keeps me going now that I don't have to write for money? Well, I never did write for money when I'm writing novels. I earned money other ways. And in fact, well, I did. Actually, I got paid quite well for the first few novels. But why do I keep doing it, basically? I like to. This is what I was meant to do. It's a lot of fun. You know, there's absolutely nothing like, you know, kind of opening the veil to the other side and, you know, pulling stuff out of it and putting it on a page. It's, you know, it's creation, you know, and if you have that particular, whatever it is, I wouldn't call it talent exactly, but if that's what you want to do, there's nothing more fun. Yeah, in the back.
How did the time travel leap into your mind?
Oh, how did the time travel leap into my mind? Well, that actually had nothing to do with Doctor Who, believe it or not. No, maybe it was in my subconscious. But anyway, the thing was, when I decided I needed an English woman, I immediately put her in the next day. This was like the 3rd day of writing. And so I had no idea who she was, what she was doing there, what her name was. So I just loosed her into a cottage full of Scotsmen to see what she'd do. Well, she walked in, and they're all sitting around the fire muttering. And one of them turns around and stares at her, and they all stare at her, and I'm thinking, why, does she look funny? Anyway, one of them drew himself up, and he said, my name's Dougal Mackenzie, and who might you be? And without my stopping to think, I just typed, my name's Claire Elizabeth Beecham, and who the hell are you? And I said, you don't sound at all like an 18th century person. So I fought with her for several pages, trying to beat her into shape and make her talk like a historical person, and she wasn't having any. She just kept making smart-ass modern remarks. And and she also took over and started telling the story herself, you know, in the first person. So I said, okay, I'm not going to fight with you all the way through this book. I said, no one's ever going to see this. It doesn't matter what I do. Go ahead and be modern. I'll figure out how you got there later. So it's all her fault that there's time travel. Okay. And that is probably a good place to wind things up for the moment. Do feel free to ask me more questions as I'm signing your books or whatever you'd like. Oh, one last one on the corner here.
I have to say, you're so amazing with your description and your vocabulary. That these characters are really real.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, yeah. I should say as a passing note that, or closing note, that one of the questions I was asked in the interview yesterday was, what is it that people find so appealing about Outlander, about your books, the show, et cetera? I said, well, I've had people tell me what they like about the books for the last 30 years, and that there's large clumps who like, the medicine, the botany, the history, the battles, the romance, whatever. People like those particular elements. I said, but basically what it all comes down to is that they consider these to be real people. And I said, which is reasonable because I do too, but they feel Jamie and Claire are real and they want to know what's going on with them. Okay, thank you very much.